I felt it was really opportune at this point to be able to address the trust. As you see, I've come with no notes, come here with a premeditated agenda. Simply one, in terms of being able to have a frank and honest conversation. Because in many times, I believe that the interest of both the trust and the government of Saint Lucia is the same. In terms, I have to imagine, all of us want to be able to develop Saint Lucia. But, as in life, there will always be different ideas in terms of how that is supposed to happen. And this is common. In fact, you don't have to go too far back. You can go back to Sir Arthur Lewis's Nobel Prize winning book on economic development, where he talked about the conflicting interest and how do you bring and mold these interests together in being able to move forward. My interaction with the trust really began, I would say, to when I was the director of tourism in Saint Lucia, and that was in 1991. And while I'd had good friends on the trust and understood the perspectives, and Robert DeVoe was an amazing individual in terms of what he was doing, and I also got to know somebody who I still have great admiration for Robert, but also Coco Charles. And I had gotten to know Coco Charles predominantly through my work when I was in economic development, in the work that he and Paul Butler were doing in the conservation of the forest, because at that point the banana industry was booming. To put it in numbers, we were producing around 120,000 tons of bananas a year. And how did we know that we were approaching fast the maximum of what we could produce? Is because now people were cutting down the rainforest in order to be able to grow more bananas. And even when people were not cutting down the rainforest, they were cutting down hillsides. And clearly that was a problem. So on both counts, I was involved with them. But the real interaction with the trust really started with the Saint Lucia Jazz Festival. What had happened was we had decided we didn't think that Aqua Action could take this country and put us on the map. We didn't think Aqua Action would ever be a world-class event that would gain any kind of global recognition. And so the decision was to do a jazz festival. And I remember Paxton Baker and a whole bunch of other people, we went around the country looking for venues for the jazz festival. And I remember when I went to Pigeon Island, it was my idea to go there, and we went to the back. For those of you who were old enough, remember where our first venue was for the jazz festival, which was behind where the museum is, the ruins. And we made an application to the trust to be able to have the jazz festival. And the decision of the National Trust was to say no. Didn't believe that Pigeon Island was the appropriate venue to be able to host an event, and that it was going to cause problems to the ruins, and that number of people coming to the event was going to cause problems. And I remember being saddened at that news, but accepting. And we were proceeding to look for other venues. And it was Coco Charles who called me up, and he said, I know the trust has made its decision, but can you come and show me where you were going to do this event on Pigeon Island? I said, sure. So I went to Pigeon Island and showed him where the stage would be, and showed him that we'd be facing L'Espore and Bird Island, and that the wind came from that direction, and that if you turned back, you would look at the gradual climb of the hillside, which made it a perfect amphitheater, and then where the sun would set on the day, and all those different things. And Coco Charles actually turned to me and he started to cry. True story. You would have thought I was the first one to cry. And I said, what's going on? He said, I have been coming to Pigeon Island for my whole life. And I never saw that. I never saw that opportunity here at Pigeon Island. And so he said, just leave it to me. So I didn't know what he meant by that. And a couple of days later, we got back a letter from the trust indicating that they in fact would reverse their decision and that they would allow the jazz festival to take place on Pigeon Island. And it was funny that first year because there was a lot of emphasis about who was going to collect the garbage, the type of stage that we were going to use, because people were concerned that the metal stage would actually put holes in the ground which would not be able to be repaired. And we went through a lot of stuff like that. And over the years, Mr. Tulsi's there, many times we would sit and debate what debushing was and how much of a tree you were allowed to take. And I remember there was a particular calabash tree that was really literally in the middle of where the venue was. And you know, I said, wow, the calabash tree is younger than I am. You know, so at what point do we go about how do we develop and how do we preserve? And what is preservation called? What is it? Ultimately, at the end of the day. So when I look at that example, it kind of reminds me very much in many ways where we are today. And I remember meeting with the members of the trust who indicated that they wanted to be able to get government to provide a government guarantee and to put additional monies in to be able to build a facility on Pigeon Island. So I'm sure many of you know what that plan was. The idea was to convert the museum into a conference facility and to take a building on the left-hand side by where the beach is to make that a office for the trust, as well as building and expanding where the gate was to put in a store. So I said, is that going to make money? Is that going to make sense? So after the government has put the capital expenditure in to be able to cover those things, are you still not going to come back and ask for an additional subvention? Do I know that this thing is going to be financially viable? And I was told that there was a feasibility study that was done, and it took a couple of months eventually to get the feasibility study, which they eventually presented to me. And what did the feasibility study say? First page, that this was not viable. That they did a sensitivity analysis, and just with a simple 10% variation of revenues, that this would not be viable. And this study was done in 2014. It also pointed out that more than likely there are new hotel developments that are going to be coming with more conference facilities, and that clearly the museum and what was being proposed didn't distinguish itself sufficiently that it could be successful. And here we are in 2019, but certainly when I came into office in 2016, Harbor Club was already underway, Royalton was already underway, and both of those properties had expanded conference facilities. So the fact is that time has proven that that study was correct. And we got into a lot of debates and discussions about the revenue generation of the trust. So where's my example come from? I'll go back to the Jazz Festival. In all my years at the Jazz Festival, did I see a tent that was up by the National Trust soliciting membership? International people, will you contribute $10 a year towards the development of the trust? Did I see the trust embracing the Jazz Festival and going to the tourist board and saying, can we get 10 photographs that can belong to us, and create postcards, create posters, create any form of material, any form of commercial activity that we were going to do? All those years. Nothing. We then also look at the fact that the tourist board put a report out, and what did the report say? The report said that we've spent $20 million over the last 25 years on building up and breaking down a stage. Think of it. $20 million. And that's just on the stage. So it begs the question, do we need any more convincing that Pigeon Island is an incredible landmark and that has both educational, historical, and commercial potential. And how we're going to be able to take advantage of that. Because at the end of the day, for the hardest of conservationists in the trust, there's still a fundamental question, is that even if you're not going to make money, it costs money to have conservation. Because there are very few sites that by themselves are going to be able to be sustainable. And so the question is, how do we manage that? How do we create a situation where the trust can be self-sufficient? And that the trust can drive its own initiative? And how many sites does this trust have? And how much time have they spent on developing any of those sites? So what it became very clear to me in my government is that the trust was in many ways taking advantage of the contribution that we were making. The contribution was very clear, that this was a contribution for capital investments into the development of the sites. And in many ways, the money was being used for recurrent expenditure. So my government withheld the $700,000 and said, once you have a plan and you can show us what you're going to do, we're happy to support it. And that promise and that offer still sits on the table. So in fact, when the chairman came to see me, and there's some critical things that need to be invested in, we're happy to participate and make those things happen. But we're also interested in seeing investment into the trust in order to make the trust more self-sufficient and sustainable. And it's not my job to educate the trust and the members of the trust, but also at the same time to walk in our shoes a little bit. Walking in our shoes is every day having to make the choices as to where you're going to spend your resources. When you have schools that need repairing, when you have health facilities and thousands of people who don't have access to health care in our country, when you have policemen that have old vehicles, didn't have radio communication systems. The list goes on of choices that we have to make every single day as to which one of these things are we going to invest in. Because it's very clear that we can't invest in all of them. That's what's very clear. And so the trust is no different. The trust has some very tough choices to make in terms of what priorities do you have? And many of those priorities, while you may say, we want to conserve this, we want to conserve that, ultimately at the end of the day, it comes down to how many man hours do you have and how much cash resources do you have in order to be able to preserve those interests. So, a controversial issue, but I'm not going to run away from controversy because it's there. It's the elephant in the room. But I think it's a great example with regards to the Dolphin Park. So what happened with the Dolphin Park? When my government came into office, we realized that the former government had improved incentives for a dolphin park in Rodney Bay. In fact, the government had acquired land for a second dolphin park in Canneries. In fact, it had gone to Parliament with it. And the developer came and wanted to proceed with the project. And what did we do as a government? We wrote to the trust. So these developers have come. Can you please meet with them and give us a report back as to what your thoughts are on this process? What pursued is really shameful. Because what pursued was not a letter back to the government responding to our request. What pursued was a smear campaign that was irresponsible, where investors were demeaned, insulted, and more importantly, a barrage of information coming out that there was no truth to it. Videos coming out of Pigeon Island being excavated, as if there was going to be a sea aquarium built on Pigeon Island. And fundamental differences between what is a dolphin interaction program and what is an aquarium. But yet to date, the trust at my recent meeting indicated they did write me, and hopefully I'm going to get the letter. But up to now, I have not seen that letter. And then they had members of the trust who actually sat in the government and all of a sudden developed amnesia as to whether in fact there was approvals or no approvals. But here we are in 2019, 3.5 years later, and nothing's been approved. No dolphin park has started. It's great, but what's missing is a conversation. Because, yes, and what's missing is a conversation. And well, there's been plenty of opportunities to have those conversations. And those conversations are about what? About a consistency of a policy. So in fact, if we're in fact going to deny having a dolphin park, and again, I'm not here to sell the dolphin park, okay? So my government has said that they want to be involved in a dialogue and a discussion, and we're waiting to have that discussion. But guess what? It's going to be a discussion. It's about having a two-way direction discussion. Right. But it's not about going on a campaign based on lies. That doesn't work. That doesn't help anybody. So at the end of the day, if you're going to take some positions that we've taken, you have to ask for consistency. Where is the same level of passion and the advocacy about Saint Lucians eating blackfish? Where is the advocacy and the consistency about Saint Lucia's long-standing position with whales? Because you can't have a conversation with one without having a conversation with all. And the fact is, and this is the hurtful thing, is the National Trust has to appreciate that it has an opinion, it has a right, and it was developed in order to be able to have that opinion and to express that point. But ultimately, it must be shared and it must be considered among all of the other interests that we have as a country. And there are times when I'm disappointed that something didn't happen, but the majority speaks. And we continue to move on. It's not every battle that we're going to win, because there are conflicting interests, as I indicated. There's conflicting goals. We may all have the idea of developing Saint Lucia, but if I go around and interview people in Saint Lucia, what that means will have a variety of definitions. There'll be no consistency in that. And so the question is, with all those different ideas, how do you move forward? Do you remain paralyzed in a position without being able to make a decision? My government recognizes the importance of the National Trust. Absolutely. My government recognizes the importance of conservation. My government recognizes the importance of culture. Because these are the things at the end of the day that help differentiate who we are. We know that. The most important word in tourism is authenticity. But the question is that has to be married with competitiveness. You see, in developing a country, you don't have the luxury of only having one set of words. The trust, for some people, not all, conservation is the word, and everything that goes around it. As a country and as a prime minister, unfortunately, competitiveness, capacity, growth, macroeconomics, poverty, all those things enter to the discourse. All of them. And we have to balance those things out. That's the reality. And we've not made any secret of it. In opposition, we said what? We have to build a new Saint Lucia. Because when you went around this country, you could see that our infrastructure was deteriorating. When I came into government, We had no DPP. Forensic lab was closed. None of the Marine Police boats were working. The radar system was not working. You have a 1,000-case backlog in criminal cases. So it means if somebody is arrested and brought to court, it takes years in order for people to be able to get it delivered. To be able to undo a 1,000-case backlog, we're going to have to dedicate 2 judges, which means we also have to expand the DPP's office because somebody has to prosecute the cases. And there's a number to it, $13.5 million, conservatively, to be able to deal with that backlog. So I say that to you, that life goes on, and there are a lot of people who have great expectations in terms of this country being able to deliver what it's supposed to do, and how do we move on. So the National Trust is not the only game in town. It's an important voice, very important voice. And a voice that I want to continue to support and encourage you, but I'm saying to you that this must be done in a responsible way. You can't talk about democracy and the rule of law and not act that way. So we recently had an incident at Canals. You don't have to go too far back to look at the history of Canals. Canals was a property that was sold in the early 80s, was resold in the early 90s. It was going to be done by couples, super clubs, was going to build a property there. Then that went bad, and another project came in, and they were going to do a golf course, everything else. All the plans were going in. And that project went into receivership. And a new group came in now and took over the land. And remember, all this time the land is remaining private and commercial. At a point where, when the Ritz-Carlton project was supposed to be done and the project went into receivership, the government decided to do a compulsory acquisition of the land because they were buying back the land, and vested it into whom? To invest Saint Lucia. To do what with? To go and find a developer. So all of a sudden the project is about to begin, and all of a sudden somebody comes up and says that there was a study that was done in 1984 that basically says that there are artifacts on the property. And the recommendation was that we cease and desist from doing any development, and that the developer, mind you, who bought the land not knowing that there was this development on it because it was never put into the National Trust, it was never put into the deed, nothing, no controls. When the person bought the land, he didn't know, they didn't know that they'd involved that. So the government thought it was unfair that the developer would have to pay for it, so the government paid for it. And we brought in a team from Martinique and a European team who bored holes all around the property and didn't find anything. We had a similar incident with the prison. Although there was a process for the trust to be able to participate in, and now we're going through a dialogue, an arrangement to be able to proceed on the development. So a project, I'm sadly to say, bringing a prison in, and we're talking about having to find, I think it's 6 graves, I think it is, of ex-prisoners that were there that we have to excavate and bring it up. I bring it up because it's important to you, but there are a lot of people in Saint Lucia it's not important to. And where do we find that marriage on how we're going to develop our countries in a conscientious way, but mindful of where we are as a country? And all these mixed interests that exist. So I wanted to come here to say to you, despite everything that has been said, that's been done, there's no animosity on my part. There isn't. There isn't. I'm here with a smile on my face, okay? And I'm willing to have a conversation, and most of you, some of you, not most, we've had one-on-one conversations where we've spent hours having these discussions. And what's important, right? What's important is that in that conversation, that there can be mutual respect on both parts. And I'm going to be honest with you. Right? I have not felt that level of mutual respect. I have felt that in many cases that people have jumped to a conclusion based on facts I don't know where they've gotten it from, and chosen, rather than try to engage in a conversation, to immediately go to the media, to participate in marches, which is fine. That's your right. That's absolutely your right. But it's also my right to be able to have these conversations with you. So I'm hearing the statement that there is no conversation, because of which I assume it alludes to the fact that I'm not going to take questions today. So I'm coming here today to express an opinion, to let you know, as your minister and as Prime Minister of this country, I do, in fact, support the trust. I do want a strong trust. I do want a strong voice, because it's part of our development. But it's part of it. It's not the whole part. And I'm absolutely willing, Madam Chair, that if you want to have a conversation when media is not here and we want to have a private conversation with a select group of members, I have to say that, because I understand, I know what goes on, right? So at the end of the day, it needs to be private, okay? But I'm happy to have that conversation anytime the members of the trust want to have it. I have never turned down the executive of the trust that want to come see me. I have turned down some people from being at the trust at my meetings, because again, they leave meetings and immediately what's supposed to be confidential is out in the media. And I wish it would be an accurate interpretation of what's happened, but it's not. So I am absolutely willing to have a meeting again with the trust if you want to broaden it to a wider membership, and we can take some of these very contentious issues and have a discussion on them. I'm prepared to do that. Absolutely prepared to do that. But what I will not do is to bend to what I consider to be unbecoming behavior. Intentions that aren't well-intended, that aren't based on mutual respect. Because I have a responsibility. I am accountable to a lot of people. And so therefore, when I come to speak with you, it is with that armory of people I must speak to. And I understand that when you come, that you bring your own perspective to the table. And I want you to articulate that on, guess what? Based on evidence, not emotion. Because if we keep having an emotional conversation, we're not going to be able to be successful. At least with evidence-based discussions, we can come to some conclusion. And that is what I want to be able to encourage. That is why I asked your chairperson whether I can have a meeting to be able to say to you that my government has and has always been prepared to have a discussion. There are projects, you say no, but it's true, because there's a process. There's a participation. So even with a dolphin park, it has to go through multitude of levels of approvals, not just one. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the truth is it's not proceeded. But what I am asking for is an evidence-based, mutual respect dialogue. And if the trust members are prepared to do that, I am prepared to do that. And to meet, but as I said to you, there are things I can agree to and there's some things I cannot agree to. And we have to learn how to respect each other's opinion on that. And I want to see the trust do well. I genuinely believe that Pigeon Island can generate a lot more resources, financial resources, for the trust. And that the trust would now be in a position to take care of many of the sites that need to be taken care of. And I'm hoping that that can happen. I've indicated investing in a cultural event. I've been saying this for years. Putting a permanent stage at Pigeon Island, where it could now become a dinner show. and that you now can help develop where artists can have full-time jobs as artists, as actors, as musicians, and that we can have a show that talks about the rich history of Saint Lucia. What does it do? It means my cruise ships can stay in harbor longer because there's something to be able to sell. Because after 6 o'clock in Saint Lucia, there's nothing to sell. And they're going to stay in port if, in fact, see, but you can't be making money or generating revenue and resources is a bad word. It is what is necessary in order to have the conservation we want. Look what we're confronting today with climate change and the investments that we're going to have to be making in all throughout the length and breadth of Saint Lucia to be able to prepare ourselves for these disasters. Can't have that conversation, as important it is and as damaging it is to human beings and also to our sustainability. Nobody's having the conversation without asking where's the resources coming from. That's what we've been on the road for 2.5 years. And what's that all about? That's about a global system that never put a price for what? For carbon emissions. Everybody who was burning coal and burning fuel and doing all these things and emitted carbons, nobody thought that there was a cost to it. But guess what? The Lord sent a bill, and the first places he sent a bill to were the SIDS because we're along the equator. And now we're being asked to pay this bill. And when we look at whether we are the biggest emitters in the world, the 39 SIDS collectively are less than 0.5%. And so now the world is talking about putting on a carbon tax. I think the price they came out with is $75 a ton. But sadly, that revenue is to go to themselves. And what we're arguing is it shouldn't be, that revenue should be going to a global good. Because when America or China or anywhere else emits, it doesn't stay in their hemisphere. It goes into everybody's hemisphere and it impacts everyone. But you see the problem when you have a project in which there is no cost associated to it, it comes back to haunt you. Everything has a cost. Everything comes back to being able to making it viable. Culturally viable, environmentally viable, socially viable, and yes, economic and financially viable. So I want to say to you that I wanted to dismiss any ideas in anybody's minds that there was any animosity, there was any hatred, that in any way that I resent anybody from the trust, from what they've been advocating. I don't like sometimes the methodology. But that being said, I am all embracing and I'm ready to move forward when you are. So, Madam Chair, whenever your executive or a wider body of your membership would like to have a conversation, and we can take different topics and figure out processes. Because situations like the Dolphin Park, situations like archaeological sites are going to come up over and over. And we need to be able to build into our policy a mechanism as to how we're going to have those conversations. They're not going to go away. And I don't think they're going to go away, and I don't believe you think they're going to go away. But there has to be a methodology on how we're going to be able to move forward with that. So with that, I know you have a very busy day, so I look forward to being able to interact with you on another day, and hopefully it will be very, very soon. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.